Hi everyone. Today's episode is sure to blow your socks off. I have 3 stories that reveal fascinating information that will make you wonder if the things you know are really true. You might even reconsider everything you've ever learned. But first, please snuggle up and pull your socks up tight, then get to know that subscribe button. Thanks. Now let's get into the stories. It was the summer of 2013. And a storm had just passed through Vermont a few days before I was set to head out to an area where I love to camp. I was expecting a few of my buddies to join me for a long weekend in the woods. The storm had us worried about the state of the park and the surrounding area, but on the bright side, it had broken a heat wave that had been going on for weeks. The forecast now promised a cooler but clear weekend, so we decided to go anyway, despite the potential mess we could find. So on Friday night, we set off, but we were so engrossed in our conversation that we arrived after dark because we missed the turnoff to the campground. Thankfully, there was a full moon that night, and you could see the outlines of the trees around us, which helped us to find our way. I remember being reminded of how much I loved it there, and that it's definitely not a bad place to stay, even if there is a bit of mud. We got some food cooking over an open flame pit and settled in to enjoy the weekend, hopefully without any more rain. The hours passed with nothing but conversation that night until somebody pointed out how noisy the woods were becoming. My ears perked up immediately at the sounds of birds chirping, insects buzzing, and other creatures doing who knows what in the night. I've spent plenty of time in the woods, but this was a first for this time of day. Or should I say, night. But it didn't really concern me, not at that point. We were all starting to get tired and most of us began to drift off. I remember hearing one of my friends try to stifle a yawn as he said goodnight. We headed to our tents, rolled out our mats and sleeping bags, and settled in. I can't tell you exactly when it happened, because I fell asleep before everybody else. But somebody must have said something, because I remember hearing somebody talking and another person shushing them to be quiet. As I continued to drift in and out of consciousness, I then heard my friends out at the campfire calling for me. It definitely sounded like something bad had happened, so I jumped up from my tent and ran over. They told me that they were out there, sure that something was lurking around the campsite. They had heard strange rustlings in the bushes, but it wasn't until they saw a set of yellow eyes peering back at them that they really got scared. We all agreed to stay near the campfire and huddled around so that whatever was out there would know we were a group. I sat with my friends for over an hour as we tried to keep each other awake, watching for this thing, whatever it was. At some point, somebody mentioned that it might have left since we hadn't seen it again. But I think everybody just assumed that it had gone into the woods, but that it could be coming back. At any rate, we didn't want to take the chance of letting ourselves get too relaxed, and we decided to take shifts sitting out and keeping watch. Just after agreeing to the plan, the next thing to happen was the scariest minutes of my life. Off to our right was a loud growl, and the ground rumbled below our feet. Before we could even scream, the creature with yellow eyes came rushing at us, but with such a speed that we didn't even see it coming at first. It was so fast, and my memory is actually blurry, but the creature looked like a dog man with black fur and glowing eyes. It was on top of us before we knew what was happening, and it just kept going from one of us to the next, swiping its claws at us and stomping its feet. It worked its way around our group, charging at each and every one of us, although it never touched anyone. Each of us have different memories of that night, but I remember that all my head could focus on was the way the thing moved. It's like when you watch one of those dog agility courses and you watch how they weave in and out without ever bumping into anything. This creature moved like that, so swift and stealthily, and only by standing on its back legs the whole time. It basically used its arms and hands like a human or an ape would, and it had to be 7 feet tall, standing on its hind legs. Its yellow eyes burned through me. I could feel them even when I was looking around at my friends. Combine all of this with a growl so loud that I couldn't think clearly. The creature had finished its attack on everybody and then began walking toward me with its head down, like a bull ready to charge at anybody foolish enough to stand in front of it. And just then, it stopped dead in its tracks and lifted its head up. Without saying a word, it then looked over its shoulder and turned and ran back into the woods. I've never seen anything move that fast or jump that high before. The strangest part was how quiet it was when it ran off. There weren't any footsteps like you would expect from something that heavy running through the middle of the forest at night. It literally made no sounds at all, except for its breathing, which sounded more dog-like than human-like at this point. But it still had an edge to it, even if it didn't sound angry. We all sat there shaking and unable to talk at first. And then one of us, I don't remember who, said that they had heard the creature speaking in their heads. They said that it was really strange, like they could understand its thoughts, but it wasn't English. They couldn't even put it into words. Others of us had the same experience, but others didn't. It's crazy how we each experienced it differently. Either way, we were all now terrified, and those of us able to function packed up the stuff and got us out of there. For whatever reason, we all came to the conclusion that the creature just wanted us to leave its land, but that it didn't want to hurt us. I wonder if we were too close to its lair, or maybe we had just surprised it. I guess we'll never really know. And thank goodness nothing bad happened to any of us, but during the encounter, it was nothing short of terrifying. We honestly had no idea if we would live or die, and that is not a feeling that goes away easily. It wasn't until the next day that we heard the rumors about other strange creature sightings in the area, and realized that's what came at us. Knowing that others had also had an encounter gave us confidence to reach out, to ask, what did other people think happened? We even tried to file a report with local authorities, but they dismissed our concern and told us to head back home and get some sleep. None of us believed that it was something normal, like a bear. We all believe that seemingly unknown creatures are real. We believe they exist in that area. I was way too shaken up to even think about going back to those woods for a few months, but now I'm back at it. Call me crazy, but somehow I feel that I'm more prepared, and now I know what's likely to happen if I ever see one again. Most of my friends haven't been out again. I'm not sure if they'll ever be able to go back to the woods, but we'll see. I have always been a bit of an adventurer, always had a thing for the outdoors ever since I was a kid. Even back then, when all the other girls were playing dress-up, I just loved wandering in the woods and pretending I was lost. I'm older now, but I had this crazy thing happen to me about 30 years ago, when I was in my late 20s. So one summer back in the 90s, I decided to plan a trip to go hiking alone in Yosemite National Park. The day I arrived, I was more than happy to be there, and I set out right away to wander off and find the most remote area I could to camp. It took hours to finally arrive, and once I got set up, I wandered off to check out the surrounding area. I'd been hiking around for a few hours, wandering the surrounding area, when I stumbled upon a trail that I hadn't noticed before. It was a bit overgrown, but something about it piqued my curiosity, and I wanted to see where it went, to follow it. The trail wasn't like others, it was more rugged, more wild. I even had to duck under branches and step over roots. After a while, I ended up at this little bridge, but the creek bed underneath was dried up. I kept going beyond the bridge and eventually came to a clearing with stones all around it in a circle. I looked closely, and right in the middle of the circle was what looked like a huge well. Now, I'd seen wells before, but this one was different. It was old and crumbling, and it had this eerie vibe to it. I found a rock and tossed it in, but I never heard it hit the bottom. I don't know if it was dry or if the water was so deep, but either way, I couldn't hear the rock splash. Next, I started looking around for more rocks to throw in. I was looking around in the bushes at the edge of the clearing when I came across these huge stones embedded in the ground, mostly buried. I could barely see them. While looking at them, I realized that there was writing on some of them, even though I couldn't understand it. I stepped back, and it took me a minute to realize they were probably gravestones, and that I was in some sort of a graveyard in the middle of the woods far away from anyone. I started getting chills when I realized that, and just then, I saw a dark shape standing just inside the woods facing me. I stood up very slowly and I stared at the dark shape. It didn't move at all until some clouds moved away and the clearing became more lit up. And that's when the shape moved as it scooted out of sight and back into the shadows. This thing was the size of a human adult, and to me it looked like it was covered in black feathers. It turned its head towards me and seemed to look right through me with these freakish red eyes. And then it lifted up these huge black wings and jumped with incredible force up into the tree behind it. And it sat there perching on a branch like some giant bird out of a nightmare. I wasn't that stupid. I turned around and I ran as fast as I could all the way back from where I had come. I ran over the bridge and found the original path, and then I looked back and I saw that thing standing there at the far edge of the bridge. Just standing there. It had somehow gotten out of the tree and followed me a bit without me hearing anything. I screamed and I kept running. I soon tripped over a tree root in the path, ripping my pants and tearing up my knee, but I just got up and I kept running. Eventually I burst out of the trees and just kept going for hours until I reached my car. From there I drove straight to a ranger station to tell them what I saw. They tried to calm me down and said there was nothing like that in the woods and that I must have made a mistake. But that just made me more hysterical and determined to convince them. I decided to do some research. I started looking into the history of Yosemite, trying to find any mention of a graveyard or a well. I spent hours poring over old maps and documents. I even reached out to local historians and park rangers, but no one seemed to know anything about it. Until one day I came across an old newspaper article. It was from the late 1800s, and it mentioned a small settlement that used to exist within the park. The article was vague, but it mentioned a well and a graveyard. My heart skipped a beat. Could this be the same place that I had stumbled upon? I needed to go back to that site, back to that trail. I was scared, but I needed answers. I needed to know if what I saw was real or if it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. I needed to prove to the rangers that I wasn't crazy. So I headed back along that same trail, overgrown and rugged. I followed it with my heart pounding in my chest for the few hours it took to get back there. A few times I even nearly talked myself out of continuing, but I kept moving along. Finally, when I reached the clearing, it was just as eerie as I remembered. The well, the gravestones, they were all there, but there was no sign of that creature. I spent the day exploring the area, taking pictures, making notes. I even dared to go down into the well a bit, but I didn't find anything unusual. As the sun started setting, I decided to put camp up in the clearing. I know that sounds crazy, but I had to know if that creature would come back. I barely slept that night, every sound making me jump. But the creature didn't show up. And then as the sun rose, I packed up my things and headed back out. Even though I didn't see the creature again, I felt this strange sense of closure. I'd faced my fear and returned to the place that had haunted me. I still don't know what I saw that day, but I've come to accept that there are things in this world that we can't explain. And you know what? That's okay. It's okay to not have all the answers. It's okay to be scared. It's okay to believe in the unknown, because sometimes the unknown is what makes life interesting. In August of 2017, my family and I were on a road trip to the Grand Canyon from Los Angeles. The drive is simpler than most would think once you get out of LA. Once you do, the congestion isn't too bad and there are manageable speed limits. I had my Toyota Highlander packed with my family, my wife, and 2 kids. Also, we set off early around 4 a.m. to avoid the LA traffic, which helped a ton. We found the city unusually quiet at that hour. The highway was almost deserted. It was a rare sight to see LA without its characteristic hustle and bustle, and I savored the tranquility, rolling down the window to enjoy the cooler morning breeze. The lack of construction work was also a pleasant surprise, and we had a smooth ride out of the city. My wife and kids dozed off quickly, leaving me to enjoy some quiet time. We crossed the city limits without any hiccups, and then I eventually stopped at a 24/7 diner to grab a cup of coffee for the road. Then we were out to the open highway with barely any vehicles in sight. I've never been a fan of driving, but this was different. The open road, the quiet, the lack of traffic, it was almost therapeutic. We reached our first rest stop about an hour into the drive. The kids were still asleep, so my wife and I took turns using the restroom. The rest stop was eerily quiet, with only a few other cars and a couple of trucks parked. I took a short walk around the parking lot to stretch my legs before we hit the road again. About 20 minutes later, we were back on the open highway surrounded by vast stretches of desert. And then suddenly, I caught some movement and saw something dark dart across the road. And I couldn't avoid it. I hit the brakes, but it was too late. My first thought was, what was that? A coyote? I pulled over, which woke my wife in the process. I told her I thought I hit something, but then when I looked in the rearview mirror, I didn't see anything at all. It was still a little dark though, and the highway was poorly lit there. So I decided to get out and look around using my phone's flashlight. I hesitated for a moment, the darkness and the silence unnerving me. I slowly walked back to where I thought I had hit the animal. And there, about 10 feet from the car, I spotted a pale, sack-like object in the desert scrub. As I approached the sack, it suddenly sprang to life and darted towards a nearby cluster of cacti. I was stunned, trying to comprehend what I was seeing. Turns out the sack was some creature, with its skin pale, almost luminescent in the moonlight. The thing moved on all fours at this incredible speed, with its limbs elongated and thin, which gave it an eerie, spider-like appearance. The body was thin, almost skeletal, and it moved with this strange fluidity that was both fascinating and terrorizing. I couldn't make out its face clearly, but I saw large black spots that could have been eyes. They were round and shiny like two obsidian stones embedded in the skull. Also, it had no discernible mouth or nose, not that I could see. Its skin seemed to ripple as it moved like a cloth caught in the wind, and then it disappeared into the desert before I could get any closer looks. The way it moved was very unnatural, almost as if it was gliding rather than running. The sight of it disappearing into the desert, its pale form blending into the darkness, was something I will never forget. I considered following it, but then I thought better of it, remembering my family was in the car. I returned to the car, still in shock, and I told my wife it was nothing, and we resumed our journey. It took me a few days to actually share the incident with her, but then I described the creature in detail, its pale skin, the long limbs, the large black eyes, and the way it moved. She listened quietly, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and fascination. She said she believed me, but I could see her mind trying to come up with a rational answer, too. I can't blame her. If I hadn't seen it myself, I wouldn't have believed it either. The encounter has since left me with this lasting impression. Now every time I close my eyes, I see that creature darting across the road, its form illuminated by headlights. I see its black eyes, devoid of emotion, its skin pale and almost glowing, and then I watch it disappearing into the desert, over and over, leaving me standing there with my heart pounding in my chest. I do still question what I saw. Was it a trick of the light? Was it a hallucination brought on by fatigue? Or was it something else? Something unexplainable? Something that exists outside the realm of our understanding? I don't know. All I know is that it was the most bizarre experience of my life. And sometimes I still find myself looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see those black eyes staring back at me.